Now that we've got a pretty good idea about what type of technology is available to us and the various connection technologies associated with TCP, it's time to move into some more detailed information and talk about scan types and methods that are available to us when using the TCP protocol, which we indefinitely will be using. Basically, these scan types are descriptions and details associated with methods for enumerating information from hosts on the network. Basically, that means we're going to scan the systems, and depending on the scan we use, we're going to find out certain information. So there are several dozen versions of scans available to us, and we're going to cover the most common and what the benefits and drawbacks are. The first one we're going to talk about is the full scan, also known as a connect scan. And basically, this is going to complete a full three-way TCP handshake. This scan will establish the most important information about individual ports that are going to be open. And we should probably go ahead and talk about ports now. A port is basically a number associated to a service that runs on a remote or target system. And if that port is open, that means that that service is enabled. And because every operating system has a different subset of services that run by default and can be installed, by determining what ports or services are running on that system, then we can fingerprint that operating system. So if 139, for example, is open on the remote system, that's going to be the default SMB sharing and network services port for Windows. If that port's open, we can pretty well determine that's a Microsoft Windows operating system, and so on and so forth for each individual operating system. So basically, different scans are going to be useful for different systems depending on how they respond to our requests. So the full scan or the connect scan is going to be the most effective because it actually completes the communication process and will give us a more accurate result of whether the ports are open or not. And the major drawback here is that because you're completing TCP communication, there are 100 different places that could be logged. Probably the system that's receiving the communication will log it. Any intrusion detection systems will definitely take note of that. So it interacts so much with the network and with the host that it's easily traced and easily detected. Now the next type of scan is a half-open or send scan, which only initiates the first of the three-step process with the remote host or target. This is probably the second most effective method of scanning, right behind a connect scan. The reason that this is so effective is because it appears like legitimate traffic and legitimate communication attempts. It goes out to the system, it sends a synchronization request, and the system replies back to us, and we ignore that. And that lets us know if they replied back on that particular port, then that port must be open. And another great thing about this is that we are actually evading most firewalls. Depending on the frequency of how we do this, to the firewall, it looks like a standard TCP connection request. So it's definitely an effective method of scanning. It's also very fast. Because we're only sending one packet and waiting on one packet to come back, then we can assure ourselves that it's going to go pretty fast on the scan process. Now, there are actually several different methods of stealth scans. When we say stealth scan in this respect, we're actually referring to the frequency and sequence in which we scan hosts. An example of this would be there are up to 65,500 and some odd ports that are available to be open on a system. Well, if we scan starting with the number 1, 2, 3, and so on until we reach 65,000, it's going to be pretty obvious that we're doing a sequenced port scan. So in order to avoid that, we might scan random ports until we reach all the ports that we want to scan. In addition, if we scan at a very high rate of speed, normal applications and traffic don't move across 150 different ports in 3 seconds. So we can reduce the speed in which that happens, and that will allow us to attempt to evade detection when performing the scan. Generally, we do not use full connect scans or full scans in combination with stealth scans. Although we can, it's still easily detected, and doing so on a large scale makes it even easier to detect. So in general, the send scan is also known as a stealth scan. In fact, in most cases, it's called a send stealth scan. But you can use other forms of scans, such as Christmas scans, in combination with stealth techniques that will allow you to attempt to go unmonitored. Now the next type of scan we're going to talk about is a little bit less effective, but it uses the fin, urgent, and push flags to try to bypass firewalls. Now, the Christmas scan kind of falls hand in hand with the fin scan and the null scan, and basically their sole purpose in life is enumerating open ports and services from Unix-based operating systems. So they're not going to work at all against a Windows operating system, and in some cases, some BSD operating systems. So it's important to be familiar with what scans can enumerate what informations from what operating systems. So keep in mind, the Christmas scan does not work against a Microsoft Windows system. Now the last scan that we're going to go into detail about before we move into UDP and ICMP is going to be the ACK scan. And basically, the ACK scan is unique in that it is trying to evade intrusion detection and intrusion protection systems, specifically firewall rule sets. What it basically does is try to map out what rule sets are available from the firewall. So we're going to be looking for those reset packets to come back on open ports. And by doing that, we can identify what systems are running on the remote system. And when we receive those resets back, that lets us know that that port or service is unfiltered between point A and point B, which is where a firewall would usually reside. So as you can see, there are a lot of good scanning options available to us. And one thing I want you to keep in mind is that these are very generalized types of scans. Probably would be safe to say that they're the most common types of scans, but there are hundreds and hundreds of different scan types available. The more popular tool, Nmap, allows us to actually set individual flags. So instead of setting just an ACK flag, for example, we could set ACK and reset flags and see what we get. So we have a lot of control over how that takes place. So you can pick and match what flags you want to use and create your own scan types. But these are the ones that are most frequently going to be used in a pen testing environment.